Open world games filled with massive worlds with tons of quests, tons of characters, and lots of things to do, and just filled to the brim with content. These games are some of my favorite games of all time. I absolutely love playing open world games. But as time has passed, I've realized that there's certain aspects that I feel has not gone as well for me. I have a very specific and particular taste when it comes to what I necessarily like about open world game design. And today we're going to get into that for a bit. Today we're going to get into why I feel most modern open world game design is outdated. Now, let me start off by saying that none of the things that I'm going to mention here today in this video are necessarily things that make or break a game for me. These are pretty much the specifics that I feel that if a game has or doesn't have, they determine whether or not these games go from a decent open world game in my mind to a game that goes above and beyond in what I'm expecting. You may not be expecting the same things that I am expecting when it comes to a game with an open world design. And that's okay. Not everyone is expecting the exact same thing. But I'm only going off of what my brain wants to see and not necessarily what everyone out there wants to see. When I think of an open world game, my brain immediately wants to be rewarded for a multitude of different things. But the biggest things that I enjoy from playing in open world games are the feelings of discovery and exploration and immersion, unique leveling systems, and the freedom to problem solve without the game really telling me how to. I'm going to use a few games as examples and mention why I think these games do something well, or maybe not as well. Again, not necessarily saying that the games mentioned here today are necessarily bad games, but more so that because they follow certain what I like to think of as tropes, they don't become my favorite games of all time when compared to other games of similar design. Now, I want to think of three particular games, and I want to say they branch from different levels of how good they are. On one hand, I think the best example I could think of the sort of open world game design that I particularly enjoy would be The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Then you have games like Ghost of Tsushima, you have the Ubisoft open world games like Assassin's Creed and whatnot. All of them focus on very different things, but are still, in its core nature, open world games. And I think that's interesting, to say the least, that there are open world games that are designed so differently, but still feel similar enough that we could still categorize them as open world video games. Now, it's been a while, so I'm going to tell you guys directly what are the things that I sort of see in some open world modern game design that I think is kind of outdated and goes against the core principles of what I said earlier, the feelings of discovery, exploration, immersion, and unique leveling systems. Some games do almost all of these very well. Personally, I would say The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is what I feel does all of those things and then some. While others, do some, but they don't necessarily do the rest. Case in point, many open world games use a sort of checklist system. By that I mean, they pretty much tell you where everything to do is, removing that feeling of exploration, since there's really no reason to explore if the game pretty much tells you for sure that nothing is there. Case in point would be the Assassin's Creed games. I haven't played an Assassin's Creed game in a few years, so maybe they've gone away with this, but this was also a issue with Far Cry, where you would essentially climb a tower, you would activate some kind of thing at the top of said tower, and the game would pretty much just fill up with little icons telling you all the little things you can do in that area. Now, I immediately want to compare this to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, since Breath of the Wild does have a tower-like system as well. The difference here, however, is that in Breath of the Wild, the only information they really convey to you when you activate said tower is pretty much just mapping the geographical area around you. But they don't really tell you where all the quests are, where all the shrines are, or anything like that. In a typical Ubisoft game, they do tell you. They pretty much just, like I said, littered the map with a bunch of icons telling you, okay, here's a side quest here, here's a collectible here, here's, X, Y, and B in these particular locations. And when I want a feeling of discovery and exploration and immersion, I don't necessarily think of a checklist, and again, there are games that are better than others that happen to also do this. A example would be Ghost of Tsushima. Ghost of Tsushima does have something where if you get to a certain part in the story, everything in the map is pretty much revealed to you. At first, when I first played Ghost of Tsushima, I was kind of happy to see that they had certain systems that kind of just was woven into the world. Like, for example, if you had a objective that you needed to go to, they didn't just have a floating blip on the map. They sort of had like the wind to guide you there. The wind, I felt, was a little too obvious in some cases, but it was a nice way of doing it, and I actually really liked that. However, once I realized that the game just told you where everything was after a certain point, kind of destroyed the whole purpose of that in my mind, considering that I realized, like, okay, I'm being given a checklist. There isn't much reason for me to explore in any location that does not have an icon there for me, which, like I said, completely removes that feeling of exploration, of discovery. Because personally speaking, and this may not be important for you guys, exploration is a huge part in open world design. I love just randomly going to places and discovering random things that don't necessarily, they don't necessarily advertise themselves as being there. And I really like that. I really like just discovering things and figuring out things for myself. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, when that first released, I remember being really into how a lot of the quests just kind of walked up to you and just kind of happened to you as you went to different locations, rather than the game telling you, like, oh, if you stand at this particular spot, something will happen, right? Not to say that Skyrim is a perfect game, but that was one of the things I did enjoy about Skyrim at the time. Also, something that I personally like to see as well when it comes to open world games is that some open world games don't feel like an open world, if this makes sense. I feel like this is one of those weird sticking points, and some people have different beliefs as to what exactly this means. But when I think of open world, my brain translates that and thinks of a game where the entire world is open for you to go to. You can walk from the left side of the map to the right side of the map without really hitting any hitches, loading screens of any kind. Now, back then, I didn't really think of this. Back then, some of my favorite open world games was like Fallout 3, Skyrim, where the only time you really had to load anything really was if you were entering some kind of building. At the time, I thought that was okay. I was cool with this, right? Because the way I looked at it, the whole outside world was all fully loaded in. I can walk from the bottom right corner of Skyrim to the top left corner of Skyrim in a single instance, right? I don't need to load anything. It felt like it was all one world. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild takes this and runs with it even further, where you can enter towns without loading screens, you can enter buildings without loading screens, and there's probably other games out there that do this exact same thing. But I just haven't played them yet, and if that's the case, then I'm probably gonna like those too. When you have a game that does this, it feels like it's more real to me. It feels like it's more realistic. Not necessarily that I want a game that's realistic, but when I have a game that's all about the feeling of exploration and immersion, having a game that's all loaded up in a single instance makes it feel more alive to me. There are several open world games that do not do this. Games like Ghost of Tsushima, they do it. There's games like The Witcher 3. There is games like Dragon Age Inquisition, where they're not necessarily bad games, of course, but they have sort of more like these large open zones and in order for you to go to the next area, you kind of have to like access some kind of menu option where it activates a loading screen, and then you end up in the next area. And that's cool and all, but it's not what I feel gives the best impression of an open world game. And you know, it's not the way I would like it. So when I see that as an option, it's like, oh, that's a little disappointing, but you know, I understand it. You know, none of these are things that make or break a game for me. It's more so that I enjoy it more when they don't have this. The last thing really does play into my craving to have a freedom to problem solve. I don't really see that up often, but Breath of the Wild is a game that does do this a lot. And that's basically, I much prefer when a game gives me multiple options to solve one thing. There's not a lot of open world games that really do this and do it really well. That was one of my biggest issues with Ghost of Tsushima. In Ghost of Tsushima, you have a lot of options to go about things, but when it comes to the story aspect, they really hammer in this choice between the ghost and the samurai way. In my playthrough, I was going completely samurai until I was forced to play the way of the ghost for story purposes. So I kind of just lost interest because I no longer had that freedom anymore. When it comes to problem solving in a video game, I typically like to be given a large set of tools and not necessarily be told how exactly I should be doing something, but more so tell me to do something and allow me to use any of my tools at my disposal. Breath of the Wild does this extremely well, where they have a lot of systems like lightning is attracted to metal, fire creates updrafts, and all these sort of different mechanics that always work pretty much regardless of the situation. If you can figure out a way to do it, you can make it happen. We still see clips years after the game has released where people are figuring out crazy tricks to this day. That's not really something you see quite often in other open world games, but that freedom to problem solve makes it so much more entertaining to me. My first time ever figuring out how to create something that was hot in the game so I can climb mountains that were just freezing cold is an experience I've never really saw in any other open world game thus far. Maybe there are other open world games that give a similar sense, but I just haven't felt it. But yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on open world game design. I feel like a lot of it is very outdated because maybe it's because Breath of the Wild just kind of, I don't know, created this new expectation in my mind, but I have a hard time playing other open world games without feeling like, oh, they missed the mark here or they missed the mark there. And I don't know, it's just how I think about it. I think a lot of open world games has sort of sacrificed a little bit of that exploration in favor of just simplifying it for the player and being told what to do. And if you're someone who likes that, by all means, have all the fun in the world, you know, have a grand time with that. However, for me, the biggest draw to these games was feeling like I was in a living, breathing world, and I go out to make my own decisions and, you know, use my own tools to figure out who I'm going to be in this world and what I'm going to be doing. It's more so just the freedom of what I get to do in the game rather than like the story aspects. But in some cases, it can be the story aspects, but for the most part, I like to be able to be given these tools to figure out what I'm doing, explore in a world that's all seamless, and just have fun, really. That's all it really boils down to. I'm not big on so just to summarize, open world games I feel should really not have a checklist like system where the game just tells you everything, because then it removes the point in exploration. Games shouldn't really have an open world design that is multiple little zones. Maybe they do it to save on resources or whatever the case may be, but I'm just not as into those games. And I feel like if you're going to do those things, then, you know, it'll probably still be fun. I'll probably still enjoy it, but it's, you know, something that I don't really like all that much. But yeah, and I guess, oh yeah, and I also don't like it when they don't let me figure out my own solutions. I want to be able to tackle a problem and use any of the game's mechanics to figure it out. I don't want to be streamlined into one specific thing. Ghost of Tsushima. But that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all I got for you guys. Let me know how you feel. Do you have any open world games that you happen to love? What is your favorite? Do you think what I'm saying makes any sense, or is it just incredibly stupid and makes no sense to you? But that's all I got. So take care, and until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.
Shifty, yeah, Shifty, wanna be the #1 gamer, come and get me. It'd be dope if you subscribe, could you like the vid, please? Take your time, you don't gotta do it swiftly. Shifty, Shifty, wanna be the #1 gamer, come and get me.